What's up, YouTubers and plant lovers? It's Justin, and today I wanted to show you how I care for my Epipremnum aureum. Now, it's got many of different common names, especially depending on which one you have, but I know you've heard it as devil's ivy, devil's vine, taro vine, and then I probably also heard it ivy aureum. I don't know, but there's a lot of different names out there, and like I said, some of them are more specific to the different kinds you have, but the one that I have right here is the Golden Pothos. And it is a beautiful plant. You can tell that the leaves have some light variegation, and that really does kind of differ from the Queen Marble one that has a whole lot of variegation on there. And with this one, this is one that actually gets really kind of large leaves. As you can tell, they are kind of dark green with a little bit of light green and really glossy and kind of turgid, so that indicates that they're pretty healthy. They have a nice water level in them and that they're actually happy and healthy. But if you notice that the leaves are sagging or a little flaccid and not really erect, then your plant probably does need some water. That's one good thing I do like about these plants is they will tell you if they're thirsty or if they need to be fed, or they might even drop a couple leaves indicating that they're getting too much light or not enough. But if you do have one that is variegated like this one or the marble one, they will lose their variegation if you do have them in low light. Now, this really does make them a really kind of popular plant. Again, going back to the common name of devil's ivy, it got that name because they were pretty much impossible to eradicate. So they are an invasive species, especially where they come from, kind of around the Solomon Islands. But if you're in zones 9, 10, or 11, you probably have to be careful if you put this plant outside. Typically in nature, they kind of do grow up trees, and you'll see them online or just kind of wherever if you're in the south, because they will shoot up trees and kind of hold on to the tree and take over the tree and just send up a whole bunch of leaves, and the plant really will look spectacular, but they are first and foremost a vining plant. I have mine in a hanging basket, and I have mine in a east-facing window, so he gets ample amounts of morning light. I had him in a south-facing window, but I noticed that he was dropping a good amount of leaves, and I even did have him scooted back a little bit because they really will thrive in almost every kind of light situation, but they are very kind of tolerant whenever you put them in low lights. So if you do have them in a low light situation, they will almost immediately kind of just stop growing. They might grow for a little bit, but they probably will kind of slow down pretty drastically. They are from kind of like the tropic areas, so they do kind of like I said, they're bright kind of filtered light because they'll grow up a tree, but they are very kind of particular when it comes to water. They need to almost always dry out completely before you give them any more water. Some people say let the topsoil, about a quarter of it, dry out all the way, but I almost let mine dry out completely because they can succumb to root rot fairly easily. Now, as I was saying earlier, they do kind of have green, kind of erect, happy little leaves, and that just means that they are happy and healthy and they do have enough water. If you do kind of see their leaves go from a brownish to kind of a flaccid look, that typically indicates they are thirsty and that they do want some more water. And if you do see them kind of turning yellow or dropping, usually that means they are getting too much water and you'll probably lose your plant to some root rot. So I always make sure that I give my plant enough water to drain all the way through the drainage holes. And if you do have a saucer, keep that saucer on there for about 20 minutes. And then after 20 minutes, that's really all that the plant needs. So you can go ahead and drain your saucer. Don't forget about it, because if you leave them in really wet, saturated soil, they will succumb to their root rot and probably die quicker than most plants will. Now, another indication of why they're really great, easier plants to take care of is they're not fussy when it comes to soil either. Typically, any kind of substrate that is for any kind of plant indoors will usually suffice for your pothos plant. They do like their substrate to kind of have a pH of around 6.1 to 6.5. They do like it slightly acidic. But other than that, I use just kind of a general all-purpose kind of well balanced, a really quick draining substrate because, like I said, they do hold on to water fairly easily and they will succumb to the root rot. So make sure whatever substrate you use that it will drain rather quickly also. Fertilizers. These guys really aren't very heavy feeders. So I don't feed mine that often. I'd say you could probably get away with feeding yours about every other month to maybe every 3 months in the spring and the summertime. Typically something high like worm compost or just an all general kind of compost will really kind of help with your plant. But fish emulsion and liquid kelp do really well with these guys also. But take care, because if you feed your plant often, you are going to burn your plant out, and a lot of salts and stuff will build up in your substrate and end up choking your plant out. So if you do kind of feed yours about every other month, which is probably almost on the line of feeding it too much, you want to make sure that you do wash your plant out at least once a month with a lot of water. Now that means taking your saucer off, maybe sitting it in the sink or the bathtub, and pouring a good amount of water, maybe about a gallon, depending on how large your plant is. But you want plenty of water to actually kind of run through it and drain out. That way you wash out all the kind of salts that end up building up in your substrates as well. And again, just remember they aren't very heavy feeders, so you don't need to feed them a whole lot. But if you do, and you don't have the liquid kelp or the fish emulsion or any kind of worm compost or worm castings, I would go with a well balanced, like a 20-20-20 fertilizer, and that should really help your plant out as well. Now, these are angiosperms, meaning that they do flower, but they do not flower in the home. Now, I want to say that they are very picky whenever it comes to flowering. They have to have the right amount of light, the right amount of water, the right amount of humidity, and the right kinds of temperatures for them too, to even flower outside. But you can kind of tell that sometimes that they will kind of get flowers on the side, but if grown indoors, they probably won't flower at all. And the lack of them flowering is kind of hard whenever it comes to identifying which plant you have. We've gotten pretty good at just identifying with the leaves, but if you were to have the flowers, it'd be way easier to identify what plant it was. So typically the ones we have, your satins, the silver ones, the marble queens, the jade, the neon, all those are pretty good at being identified by their leaves. But some of them you kind of have to have the flowers to kind of be 100% sure on that. But they probably definitely will not flower in your house. I've had a Pathos for as long as I can remember, and I've been in the game for about 15 years now, give or take another, I would say take another 2 years. So I've been dealing with these plants for a long time, and I've never seen one flower. My parents grew some, and I'd never seen them flower also. But they can probably flower outdoors, but it is still tricky even yet to get them to flower. Now, as a lot of you probably know, they do have calcium oxalate in their leaves and their stems, and that is considered to be toxic to people and animals. So if you do have a little kid running around or a pet that probably puts things in their mouth or just chew on the leaves, I would put this plant up if you have this plant. It is toxic, but it probably won't kill them. Typically what happens is they'll start vomiting and getting pretty sick, but usually it very rarely results in a fatality. Now, I have this plant and I have a couple other pothos, and I've got an indoor dog and an indoor cat and some outdoors, but I've never had a problem with any of my pets putting the leaves in their mouths or chewing on one of the old dead ones. But if your pet or child does that, I probably wouldn't keep this plant. But if you do, kind of keep it up high. But remember, it is a vining plant, so the leaves will hang down. And they can be a little fussy at times, so they may drop a leaf or two. And if you do have something that would probably pick it up and chew on it or put it in its mouth, I just wouldn't keep the plant at all. But a lot of people really like these plants because they are really great at cleaning the air. A lot of people like to put them in their bedrooms to help with the oxygen at night. But these plants are great at filtering out any kind of stuff in the air that we don't really want in there. But they are really great at filtering out any kind of chemicals or anything like that in the air as well. Now, with pruning, I prune mine avidly. And that typically helps the plant stay rather bushy instead of getting kind of long and leggy and kind of lanky. So if you've noticed yours is starting to get a little bit kind of spacey and doesn't really look right, and you want it to actually get a little bit fuller, make sure you trim your plant with sanitized pruning shears, and that'll help your plant kind of bush out a little bit more and kind of fill out as well. But also, if you've been one to kind of take yours from a cutting and you can see the bottom of your pot with a lot of substrate and you want your plant to kind of fill in a little bit faster, take your clippings and kind of, instead of throwing them out, kind of stick them back down in the substrate, and your plant will actually get a little bit fuller faster if you take your clippings and just kind of stick it back into the pot. Now, I've had friends of mine tell me that you can actually grow these relatively quickly in water, but I've also heard that they can be a little finicky. Typically plants that are grown in substrate, if you switch them over into water immediately, sometimes they have a little bit of trouble taking right away, and vice versa. If you've taken your cutting and you've stuck it in water immediately, and then you take it and try to plant it, a lot of times they'll be a little bit harder to take by switching up the substrate that way. So if you lose your plant, it's probably not your fault. They can be a little fussy whenever they're switched a little bit. But other than that, they really are great plants to have, and they are good at filtering out the air around you. Now, I've got a bunch of these other ones. We'll probably do a video sometime in the near future on my Pathos collection. But before I head out, I wanted to kind of help you maybe understand a little bit of the difference between the Philodendrons and the Pathos. Now, typically, the only way I'm able to really tell, the Philodendrons have more of a sheath along the edges where the leaves come out, and the Pathos have larger leaves. Typically, the Philodendron's leaves are more darker, and the Pathos are a little bit lighter, and they do kind of have a rib in the middle of the leaf, where the Philodendrons are a little bit more flatter as well. Now, I will leave the identifications up to the scientists, the botanists, and all those people that do it so well. I just wanted to kind of tell you a little bit of a difference so that it might help you to identify between the two, because they really do look so similar. And unless you really know what you're looking at and have a little bit of experience, it can be sometimes a little bit harder to identify, especially whether or not you know if you have a difference between a Philodendron or a Pathos. Now, if you guys have any kind of questions or comments or concerns, let me know in the comments, and let me know if you've ever had any kind of success or failures, or what your favorites are. Like I said, I'd really like this one just because the leaves really get so big, and they're pretty fast growers, but there is a one that kind of a newer one that came out. It's called a Glacier. It's really pretty. You ought to look that one up too. But the leaves don't get as big, but they are variegated with more of a white color instead of a lighter green or a yellow, like the golden one is that I have here. Well, guys, that's really all I know about this plant. Like I said, sometime in the near future, I want to be able to show you my Pathos and Philodendron collection. But I might do one kind of on them separately and then show you my collection. But who knows? We'll see where it goes from there. You guys, leave me a comment and let me know if you've ever had any kind of success or failures with these plants. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button or the bell next to it. That way you'll know anytime that I've uploaded a new video. You guys take it easy, have a good one, and don't forget, always plant prudently. Thank you, YouTube.